accountability and integrity in Nexus. However, I will start slightly talking in the first part about water governance and water integrity. And there will be specific focus on corruption, which is something the Water Integrity Network focuses on in its work mostly. So I'm very happy to have you all there. I can see students and would like to know. I don't know. I mean, probably everyone do not have access to chat, but in some form, probably you would like to know if you have questions. You can, when you are asking a question, maybe you can introduce yourself. So then, what I will first do is like share my screen. And before I start, if there are any questions, any clarifications, please let me know. Just a second. Right? Is it visible? The PowerPoint? Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. Yeah. Okay. Good morning. Good morning, Rennie. So, as mentioned, this is by invitation. I am very happy to be invited by the university in Namibia to be part of this seminar. And today we'll spend about 1 hour, and I don't know how much time you have in total, but I have made a presentation which is a bit long, but we can definitely you can definitely tell me when you think that it is crossing the time, and we can then adjust accordingly.
You have 2 hours.
Okay. Okay. Good. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. Great. So first, just to mention, I mean, we are all in different parts of the world, and here I am based in Berlin in Germany, and you are there in Windhoek, I believe. So this is how we are, and I think we are from different parts of the world. We always come together. It will be good to know, I mean, if there are also participants here who are not from only Namibia, but from other countries. But I think the option of chat is a bit limited, but if someone can put in chat, it will be good to know. So to start, I would like to start with a very powerful quotation. This was made by Wangari Maathai, who is the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2008. And unfortunately, she is no more, but she has done amazing work on environmental conservation, forest management, etc. So what she said was, the global water crisis is a crisis of governance, man-made, with ignorance, greed, and corruption at its core. So this is very important to note, that a lot of our water-related governance and management and the services, the service delivery, access to water, it's not always due to the lack of the resource, but it is due to problems in management, problems in governance. And we don't want to talk always about a certain topic, which is corruption. But this is very crucial to understand, and I think most of you are aware of it. We all encounter it in our daily lives. We all encounter it. We read about it in the newspapers, and scandals are coming out. Not only about water, but it is across different sectors. And it's also to mention that corruption is not just in our global south, it's everywhere. Now, very briefly, I wanted to share about who is Water Integrity Network, what we do. As mentioned, we are based in Berlin. We are a very small team here. We used to be part of the Transparency International, which probably many of you are aware of. Transparency International is the global movement against corruption. So at the Water Integrity Network, we advocate for political and social action for water and sanitation integrity, raising awareness of the benefits of integrity and training stakeholders to tackle the issue. We encourage collective action by supporting multi-stakeholder processes, connecting actors, and enabling and knowledge sharing among practitioners. We promote practical evidence-based responses to poor integrity, assessing and researching risks, and developing integrity risk mitigation strategies at different levels. So what I want to mention is that there are some terminologies that will probably be coming across today, and you might be wondering, or you might want to know more about it. If you have questions around those terminologies, please let me know. On the next slide, what I'm sharing are some of the terminologies which we'll be using today, and you are probably aware of a lot of them already. What I tried to do is, because there are always different definitions, there are definitions which are applied in the academia, there are definitions which are applied in the global development sector, which may not always be from the academia, and there are other definitions. I tried to pick up a definition from different sources so that we have a mix of sources here. And so I would like to introduce you to some of these terminologies. The first one is, just a second. Yeah, the first one is on integrity, something which is very at the core of WIN's work. And WIN looks at integrity from a positive lens. It is important because corruption, as we know, is a sensitive topic, difficult topic, difficult to address. So you need to look at it from a positive side. Probably this is where we'll be able to bring in the change. So the Water Integrity Network does not point fingers, does not say that, okay, that there is corruption here, there is corruption there. We all acknowledge that this is an issue, this is a problem, and we need to take preventive measures, measures that can mitigate corruption, strengthen integrity. So this is where we come in. So integrity means using vested powers and resources ethically and honestly, ensuring services and resources go where they are intended and most needed. Practically, this is done by building up transparency, accountability, participation, and implementing preventive anti-corruption measures. This is a framework, what we call TAPA, Transparency, Accountability, Participation, and Anti-Corruption. We apply this framework in our work. I would like to know, maybe you can raise your hands, how many of you are well versed with the terminology of integrity, transparency, accountability, the three important ones. It will be good just to raise your hand so that we know we are remote, so that we make it a bit more interactive. Okay, good. I can see a couple of hands. So let's move forward. So here is a definition on transparency. Transparency is a subject which has been talked about quite a lot in the governance discourse. There is an organization like Transparency International, and the focus is been on corruption, but like, what does transparency mean from a definition perspective? So it comprises the legal, political, and institutional structures that make information about the internal characteristics of a government and society available to actors both inside and outside the domestic political system. What I would like to add is that it's not necessarily always about government and society. It can be information that are relevant for public, relevant for society. And it may be something which also needs to come out from the private sector. Transparency is increased by any mechanism that leads to the public disclosure of information, whether a free press, open government, hearings, or the existence of non-governmental organizations, with an incentive to release objective information about the government. Here, the focus of the definition has been government, but as I mentioned, it goes beyond government. Accountability. The fact of being responsible for your decisions or actions and of being expected to explain them when you are asked. So there are different types of accountability mechanisms. Everybody has a role and a responsibility. There are accountability relationships which are vertical or which are horizontal. There are also other forms of accountability relationships. Participation. I think participation is something which is often talked about. And at the most basic level, participation means people being involved in decisions that affect their lives. A definition from LDs. Is there a hand up? Next is moving forward from participation. We want to look at inclusion, a term which is more used now. And this is because when we talked about participation, it has often been seen that everyone is not included. People are still left out. And hence there is a term called inclusion now in the global development discourse. Authentic involvement of traditionally excluded individuals and or groups into processes, activities, and decisions, policy making in a way that shares power. So there are groups which are, for example, vulnerable groups. There can be groups who are marginalized in a particular country, in a particular society. There may be minorities, indigenous communities, including women, who are many times not part of participatory decision making. Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Corruption can be classified as grand, petty, and political, depending on the amounts of money lost and the sector where it occurs. So there are various forms of corruption also. Governance, something which we have been also talking about a lot. In its purest form, governance describes the structures and decision-making processes that allow a state, organization, or group of people to conduct affairs. Now, governance is not enough. What we are talking about when we are talking about integrity, when we are talking about eliminating corruption, we are talking about good governance. So good governance is very important. Good governance is, among other things, participatory, transparent, and accountable. It is also effective and equitable, and it promotes the rule of law. Good governance ensures that political, social, and economic priorities are based on broad consensus in society, and that the voices of the poorest and the most vulnerable are heard in decision-making over the allocation of development resources. This is the definition for UNDP. What I would also like to mention is that we all have different perspectives, different ways of looking at things, different cultures, different regions, and many times a lot of this discourse comes from the education system that has been built globally on the Western education system. However, we need to also consider that there are other ways and means when we are talking about these issues that have been traditionally addressed and traditionally considered in societies, in different countries, in different regions. There are systems in place, there are ways in place. For example, we talk of global international laws, but there are also traditional laws, which are also played an important role in governance and good governance. And those are some things we should not ignore as we try to improve our sustainable development, our society, our resource management, etc. Great, thanks. Now, why are we, I mean, I understand you all are students here working on water as a resource, IWRM, water resource management, water, environment, food, Nexus. I mean, these are the subjects, these are the topics around which you are working. From a governance perspective, you might be in your core, having an engineering degree, working on engineering, hydraulics, but it is important for everyone to understand the governance and management side of it. And why it is important, because you can have the infrastructure, you can put pipelines, you can build a dam, but behind these lies a lot of processes, which includes making decisions, choices, and which are influenced by various factors, including vested interests. And hence, it is very important to understand the governance perspective when it comes to water resource management. And here, why focus on water and sanitation sectors? At WIN, we try to talk about sanitation also apart from water, because as you all know, this is another important issue, often ignored, but very important from a rights perspective. Now, why focus on water and sanitation sectors, and especially from the corruption and integrity perspective? One, we all know water is scarce and is becoming more so. There are many conflicts happening in different parts of the world over water. Water governance is dispersed across agencies. The management, the governance of the resource is not necessarily lining with one agency. It's not with one government. It's not just the Ministry of Water which is responsible. It's also the Ministry of Irrigation which has a responsibility, but it's also the responsibility of Ministry of Energy, or for instance, Finance, because a lot of the funding for water-related projects are managed from the Ministry of Finance or allocated from the Ministry of Finance. So different agencies, different ministries are involved when you talk it from a country perspective. Outside that, there are other organizations, agencies involved. There are UN organizations who play an important role in water governance and management. There are bilateral agencies like the GIZ, the Swedish Development Agency, and others who play an important role, because all of them are coming with a lot of funds. And how the funds used, that becomes crucial, and they also play an important and influential role. Apart from that, there are also the multilateral banks like the African Development Bank. There is even from a country like the Development Bank of South Africa. They are all responsible. They all invest in water in some form or the other. And in addition, another important topic which I have not touched upon yet is climate. And we all are aware of the climate crisis, what we are facing now. And this is also changing the way we look at water. So obviously, the scarcity is there. We are talking about climate adaptation, and which to a great extent is actually water adaptation in the water sector. Now, with climate crisis and the climate discourse, there are new actors, new organizations which are coming into play. For example, the Green Climate Fund. So this is a very complex area where very numerous actors are involved. Now, water infrastructure involves increasingly large flow of public and private investments. So as I mentioned, for adaptation purposes, for various other projects, dams, irrigation systems, pipes, etc., infrastructure has to be developed. Even for disaster risk management, you build flood dikes, embankments to protect against flooding. So various cyclone shelters. So there are numerous. So what I'm trying to say is that infrastructure is where a lot of the issues happen, a lot of corruption happen around that, procurement processes within infrastructure. And recently, a new report which came out from the UN Ops mentioned that more than 50% of infrastructure investments from the climate funds will be going to water sector. So this becomes very important to note. Again, water management is a highly technical process. Everyone does not understand the engineering, the dynamics behind it. When we are talking to someone outside our area of work, sometimes, for example, someone who works in banking, someone who is into insurance, they don't understand many times what kind of work we do. What do we do actually? What do you mean by water management? What do you mean by water? Everybody knows that it comes from the tap, but no one knows like what is actually happening behind that, how it is ensured that they get it from the tap. So this is very important to talk about it to others. Something important also is informal providers play a key role in service delivery. And when I say informal, this is also like because we have what you call challenges in ensuring water services, sanitation services to people at home. For in cities, I mean, we have informal settlements, slums. We have many challenges which we are dealing with. Many times there are informal service providers, and there are also issues of governance around that. It can be about extracting groundwater. It can be around water tankers. There are water tankers, private water tankers. Many times in a city, for example, the bulk of the water tankers are controlled or belong to a politician. This is where corruption happens. And most importantly, the poor, voiceless, and marginalized are most vulnerable and always like left out. So, according to the Global Water Intelligence, 10 of the top 20 scandals related to the water sector involve corruption. Corruption increases between 7 to 16% the prices for standardized and unique goods, for example, pipes, and 10 to 19% the incidence of cancellations and delays. So I'm talking a little bit more of corruption because this is a subject which, as I said, very difficult to grasp, to address. And as students, it's important that as you move ahead into the future, that you take this into consideration. I would like to share a little bit more about our work when we try to work on this topic. It's not easy. When we go to a government organization or even some international NGOs and development sector organizations, and we say we want to address that issue of integrity in the sector, it's not an easy process. People are reluctant. And it takes quite a bit of time before we can convince others to work on the topic. So this is something where we, for example, went to a water utility in a certain country, and their first reaction was, oh, you have come to scrutinize us. So we said, no, we are not here to scrutinize you. We are here to support you. We understand that this is an issue. You also acknowledge it, and how do we address it? It takes a bit of discussion, building trust, and then the management of the utility was open to working on the topic. So this is a process which cannot be addressed overnight, and it takes years. So what we build, we should try to strengthen it. Again, I want to bring one case study. I don't want to go too much into the cases. And this one I'm bringing in because it has been published. This is also something we have to take into consideration when you want to talk about cases, examples, and it comes to corruption. Since it's about reputation, it can tarnish someone's image, an organizational image, if there are false accusations. So it is very important to take into consideration that there is enough verification. There are multiple sources of verification. There are audits, etc., before you actually can say that like this is corruption, and it should be published material you're talking about. So here is an example which our director talks about. She comes from South Africa, and see, in 2014, this is the way she's talking about 68-year-old Tisialani Matebula slaughtered a chicken to celebrate the presidential launch of the Gyani water project that would bring water to 55 villages. So that was about a project which was inaugurated by the government. Then in 2021, when we had a publication which came out in 2021 called Money Down the Drain, and it's focused on the corruption in South Africa's water sector. What we have found is that project costs have risen from around $35 million to to 200 million US dollars. It's a huge increase we are talking about here. Why? I just want to mention we have a case from South Africa, but it's not just in South Africa. Here in Germany, we have been dealing with a project. The Berlin airport, a new airport has been built, and the cost escalated significantly. The project got delayed by 6 years before it was completed. It's everywhere. Project remains unfinished amid claims of corruption. For those who did not get water, it is often brown. People are still fetching water in buckets from crocodile-infested river. It is obviously affecting their health, livelihood, and contributed to overdraft of the Department of Water and lack of funding for other projects, including maintenance. This is one example. There are numerous other examples also, and if you're interested, we can share some of these with you. We have on our website, you can visit. We have some publications where you can come across these. So what was one of the conclusions is that while formal rules, policies, and laws appear to be in place, in reality, they don't always work. We talk of having a charter, we talk of code of conduct. They're many times in paper, but are they actually applied? In many instances, they're not applied, and this is an issue of integrity. So do you know any cases of corruption in the water sector? I mean, if so, you can put on chat who will be able to. And if anyone from the room wants to, in 2 minutes, talk about an issue of corruption, may not necessarily be from, it can be published, it can be something that you have heard about, because this is within a room we are talking about. Here we are not accusing anyone or anything. You can share, you have encountered, people sometimes have to pay bribe for accessing water. Is there anything which anyone wants to share here, so that it's also we make it a bit more, we learn from each other? Not really. Good. I would like to hear more as we go along. If you feel later to share, please. Yeah, please come in. Yeah.
I'm having challenges raising my hands. I just remembered of a report that was shared. It was a bit controversial back in 2015 here in Namibia, when 10,000 toilets were built at a cost of nearly 200 million in 5 northern regions, stretching from Omusati to the Zambezi. And this is something that is actually available online. It was covered by our newspapers back then, our media. So those were some examples where one would really ask, you could have done more with the resources, because it really doesn't cost the unit cost of constructing a VIP latrine. If you calculate 200 million for 10,000, that in itself just gives you an idea of somehow costs have been inflated, and there is very little accountability on the part of the people who have actually approved these requisitions, as well as the people that were given the contracts to actually provide this particular service. So it's online. It's something that is reported in the public domain. So I thought we could also refer to that particular example.
Great, thanks. That's a very good example, and also from Namibia. Yes, I mean, these are the kind of examples, cases we actually come across. And this is not like changed much. I mean, there are numerous examples. I'll come across some later and focus a little bit more. What can you consider as corruption? What can you consider as probably corruption? An issue of integrity. I will share a slide on that a bit later. Thanks, Rennie, for that. Now, little bit taking, let's say, a wider look now beyond corruption. We are talking about governance and integrity, because corruption is very negative. Let's look at like still how we can improve our governance, our management, etc. So here I want to introduce one set of governance principles. There are others in relation to water, and these are the OECD principles on water governance, which WIN has been part of when it was developed. And it's focused on effectiveness that relates to the contribution of governance to define clear sustainable water policy goals and targets at all levels of government to implement those policy goals and to meet the expected targets. Efficiency relates to the contribution of governance to maximize the benefits of sustainable water management and welfare at the least cost to society. Trust and engagement relates to the contribution of governance to building public confidence and ensuring inclusiveness of stakeholders through democratic legitimacy and fairness for society at large. Within this, you'll see that there are 12 principles. Data and information, very important. Data is falsified, one. When you are looking for data from organizations, let's say data on urban water utility, many times that the data is captured is manipulated. That's a big issue. Second, data is not often shared. If you ask for data, sorry, no data. This is an issue also which is in relation to transboundary water management. It's important to share data transparently because that will help in managing the water resources, the conflicts within transboundary rivers, let's say. Financing, we all know a bit about financing, and this is where a lot of the corruption also happens, and just mentioned how cost has been inflated. That's an example. Regulatory frameworks, there are regulations, regulatory bodies. You have, for example, factory which discharges wastewater, and ideally they should be treating them in an effluent treatment plant, let's say the garment industry. However, this does not happen always, but there are regulations that governs. Sometimes the regulator themselves are not following this because of various reasons. It can be lack of capacity, lack of resources, but it also can be that because of corruption, that they get a bribe from a factory and they overlook the discharged wastewater which has not been treated. Innovative governance. Our governance always needs to look at new ways and means. And as mentioned, we have, decentralized governance is something which has picked up over the years. What can we do more in terms of innovation in relation to water management? I think digitalization, digital governance is something now being talked about. Does it have something to contribute to water management, water governance? Integrity and transparency, obviously, this is what we have been talking about. Stakeholders engagement, another important one. As mentioned earlier, water disperses across different agencies. It's not managed and governed by one government agency, but a multitude of actors are involved. And this is very important because different stakeholders have different requirements, different priorities, and also they have different levels of, let's say, power. Power dynamics is very important, which comes in stakeholder engagement. And this is where integrated water resource management is very, very crucial in relation to stakeholder engagement. Nexus is also building collaborations, dialogues among different stakeholders. Trade-offs across users, rural, urban, agriculture, energy. This is what we know a little bit about in the case of Nexus, where negotiations and trade-offs are important. Power dynamics plays a role here. Sometimes rural areas are ignored because the city needs the water, or the Coca-Cola factory next to the village extracts all the groundwater because they have the power and the money to do that, and people in the village do not have access to the water. So these are the trade-offs which happen. Who gets the resource? Monitoring and evaluation is very important to look at what is being invested. We need to all monitor, and the monitoring and evaluation. That's the monitoring. The role of monitoring is not only of the government, It's also of the civil society organizations and other entities. So it's very important as citizens and civil society organizations to be able to monitor, to have information of what's happening with projects, with allocation of resources, with planning, decision making. Should we have a dam here? Should we have a dam there? Who makes the decision? Are the people included in the decision making? Is it inclusive, as we are talking about inclusion? Clear roles and responsibilities, that's accountability. Appropriate scales within basin systems. It's very important to look at which scale are we working. Very complex, from a watershed level to a large river basin level, transboundary level. Again, policy coherence. There needs to be alignment of different policies. Sometimes policies are conflicting. Policy for energy sector might be in conflict with the policy of the water sector, but there needs to be some alignment. Capacities, something which we try to deal with. It's another challenge. There are always not enough capacities to address all other principles which you just talked about now. So very important, how do you build capacities? And today, as a part of this seminar, this is also a part of capacity development and capacity building. By these, we build our knowledge, which we should be able to apply in future in our profession. So principle 9 out here is integrity and transparency. This is something where we is trying to further focus on. Now, another terminology or something which probably you are aware of, which I would like to introduce here, is human rights to water and sanitation. This is also very important. This should be the first principle, the first priority for anyone, how to ensure that everyone has access to safe drinking water and sanitation. We know it's very difficult challenge, but this should be the priority. And South Africa actually has made a lot of progress in that direction compared to many other countries. The right to water entitles everyone to have access to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water for personal and domestic use. The right to sanitation entitles everyone to have physical and affordable access to sanitation in all spheres of life that is safe, hygienic, secure, and socially and culturally acceptable, and that provides privacy and ensures dignity. This is something we should not forget as we work on big projects, on water for irrigation, water for energy. We should always ensure that, like, have we ensured water for people, sanitation services for people, that when we are allocating water for other sectors. So clean water needs clean governance. Now, let's look at a few things around corruption. What are the drivers for corrupt behavior? So this is a very old 1973 fraud triangle from Cressy. It's a pressure. I need money. I need a service. There is no other way to behave. Opportunity. Now is my moment. Now is my moment to make money. Rationalization. Everyone does it. Why shouldn't I? If not me, the others will. This is more from an individual perspective, how people think. And this can cumulatively lead to grand corruption. Grand corruption. So typically takes place at high levels in public or private sector. Involves actors that make rules, policies, and executive decisions. For instance, politicians. Often involves large sums of money. Often called political corruption, highlighting the negative influence of money in political processes, campaigns, and in political parties. So this is like when big money is involved, when you hear of a scandal, something is flashed across the newspaper. This is what we're talking about in grand corruption. But in our daily life, we also suffer. We have to deal with petty or administrative corruption, as they say, and both are very crucial to be addressed. Small-scale administrative or petty corruption at the interface between public institutions and citizens. Bribery linked to implementation of laws, rules, and regulations. For example, when civil servants give access to water only if they receive payment higher than the real price. What we also are mentioning here may include extortion. Why we want to highlight it is that bribery is not always money. It can be in other forms. And currently, Water Integrity Network is focusing on the very difficult and again a sensitive topic of extortion. Many times women can get access to water when they are actually offering themselves for sex. And there are many examples of that. It's very difficult to talk about, but we want to highlight these. And these are issues of integrity. Extortion, what we know about. Usually small amounts of money when endemic can be large total costs. Often not clear where petty corruption ends and corruption begins. One can lead to the other. So three major areas of corruption and integrity failures we want to highlight here. One is corruption in public resource management, which is water, which can be different kinds of resources, forest resources. It can be Rennie, yeah.
Thank you. You just mentioned something that just struck me because I recall a report that was in the media as well, and this time it's from Zimbabwe in the capital city, which is Harare. There's a high density area called Mavuku Tafara, and there women were now exchanging sexual favors in exchange for water. So these are real issues that you're actually making reference to, and they are reported cases. It ended up going all the way to be reported. I'm not sure whether it was prosecuted, but it was certainly reported that the water wars in that particular residential area made women vulnerable to sexual exploitation. In this case, they were preyed for sex by suppliers of water that will be providing water through Bowsers. Over to you.
Thanks for sharing that. Yes, this is something which it is exposed, it is known, that is very useful. In many cases, they're not exposed, they're suppressed for various reasons. But we need to talk more about it, because that's only how we can counter this form of exploitation. Thanks. So I was talking about three major areas of corruption and integrity failure. One is in public resource management. It is water. It can be forest resources. It can be around food. It can be around agriculture. It can be many things which are public resources, which you know. So examples are collusion in procurement, accounting fraud, funds diverted with falsified construction or maintenance work order, cronies hired in strategic position, abusive per diem claims. It can be numerous. It can be various types. So these are what we call integrity risks. These are the risks which point towards, like when it happens, obviously it's corruption, but in our work, we look them as risks. Corruption at individual institutional interface. Examples are bribe to an official or service provider. I want my connection to be fast, so please, I'm paying you, you get me a connection. Issues of integrity, equity, and development, especially in marginalized settings like informal settlements. Lack of financial provision for service delivery in informal settlements. Often, when the funds are allocated, the informal settlements do not get much of the money. It goes into the richer neighborhoods and communities. Just want to mention that in relation to funds which are coming from the climate finance, funding from the climate sector, it's less than 10% of the funds are actually going for local projects that reaches a level of communities. And it is only around 2% of that huge funding in climate which is there that goes for vulnerable communities. So this is what you call the discrepancy that we are dealing with. Funds can be diverted. Private gain might include diverting funds to one's own possession, while political gain could mean, for example, using public resources to consolidate power. Consolidating power is also a form of corruption. There are politicians who are in power for long. There are bureaucrats who hold positions for years. And when people are embedded, this leads to opportunities of corruption. Corruption and integrity failures happen everywhere. At the one end is the petty corruption, mostly involving individuals. At the other end is systematic grand corruption, which we talked about. Even in these challenging environments, pro-integrity preventive actions can be highly effective. So we need to keep taking preventive measures. Corruption and integrity failures in water and sanitation affect every stage of program development and service delivery. They have tremendous financial, social, human, environmental, and climate costs, mostly affecting the poor. So the costs of corruption and the opportunity for integrity. Moving a bit further into the topic, what we have here is that financial costs, 4 to 26% of investments are lost to corruption. This is based on a World Bank estimate in the water sector. Huge money. Social costs, poor water quality, poor service with direct impact on people's health, lives, and livelihoods. Environmental costs, pollution, vulnerability to disaster. Long-term system failures, poor quality, delayed or missing infrastructure. Loss of economic productivity, lack of trust between water users and government, maladaptation to climate change. This is another topic which we are working on at the moment a lot. Also with the Green Climate Fund, maladaptation. I think often now you'll hear about climate adaptation. There has been a lot of discussion around climate mitigation, and now we're talking about climate adaptation. And as mentioned, water is at the core of climate adaptation. However, when projects are planned, when decisions are made, it can be influenced by vested interest, or it can be not thought through. Looking at the long-term, what are the risks? There is no proper risk analysis. And you invest the money and you have an adaptation project, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the line, it does not serve the purpose. And now when you're in a climate crisis, this is very important to address this at the onset, because maladaptation can lead to further maladaptation. I want to give an example. In Bangladesh, climate funds were allocated for building cyclone shelters. Because of the climate crisis, there were communities, fishing communities, who were vulnerable to the disasters, cyclones, which are frequently increasing, especially in Bangladesh. And funds are allocated to build cyclone shelters for the fishing folk. What happened? The government official who was responsible built the cyclone shelter, and this is one example from numerous other examples, in his own property, which was on the other bank of the river, not on the bank where the fishing community lived, but on the other side of the river, in his property, and using it for storage purpose. This is a small example of like how small, what you call vested interest, can lead to large-scale maladaptation. Because that's a community, when the cyclone will happen, they will not have access to that such shelter, and obviously it can lead to other forms of disaster. This is well documented by Transparency International. Integrity is a lever for change, for more effective and equitable use of the resources already available, for addressing root causes of issues and systemic problems, for building trust and creditworthiness and to attract new financing, that is mutually reinforcing with efforts to realize human right to water and sanitation, that is possible with practical, incremental, integrity management practices, and TAPA, which is transparency, accountability, participation, and anti-corruption framework. Integrity, we try to look at it from a very positive lens. So a positive preventive approach, as mentioned, corruption is a sensitive topic. Water integrity is a positive approach to addressing integrity, performance, and corruption issues, sector performance, emphasizes equity and focuses on preventing risk mitigation. It's better to prevent than when a corruption happens and then comes sanctioning, but you have already lost by then whatever was originally planned. It helps build trust and also bankability of projects. Citizens are keen to engage when there is an opportunity. Efforts to combat corruption as a society and enhance human rights are mutually reinforcing. Prevention is less costly and comparatively low maintenance than tackling corruption problems once they begin. Now, we talked about integrity as a definition before, and here again, I would like to reiterate so that we refresh. WIN defines water integrity as the use of vested powers and resources ethically and honestly for the delivery of sustainable, equitable water and sanitation services in the public interest. Water integrity is implicit in human rights obligations, explicit in administrative justice laws of many countries, and operationalized through the principles of TAPA framework. So we look at it as integrity is looking at transparency, accountability, participation, and anti-corruption. However, I would like to mention that there are other ways of looking at a definition. This is a discourse. There is also something called environmental integrity. It's the integrity of the environment, of the ecosystem. There are something around ethics, values, morals. They are all part of integrity. There are sometimes questions asked to WIN. Why don't we look at ethics? And this is very difficult to address ethics. It's difficult to address in different cultures, etc. But what we try to do is like, if you can address integrity in systems, in processes, where it's possible. That's why we're talking about those risks. If there is a problem of what you call financial management, if there's a problem of human resource management, we can try to tackle those. But when it comes to values, ethics, it's also on individuals. Here, I would like to share a video with you. I think it's 2 minutes, and I hope the sound works. If it does not work, please let me know, and I'll just put it on. Does it come on your screen?
We can't see anything. can't see anything on our screens. There's no video.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. And can you see the screen?
We can only see your slides.
Okay, great. So that was a short video. I hope I don't know if everyone managed to see it. It's still available on our website.
Yeah, we couldn't see anything inside.
Oh, sorry. I'll share it on the slides. You can share it with everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think some point we probably want to take a short break. So I will continue with a couple of more slides, and before we enter the discussion around Nexus, we can take a short break. Is that fine?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, great. So I mentioned about risks, integrity risks, and here we just would like to show it like through an illustration where the risk can happen. What we have here, we're talking about water service delivery, and water is allocated, a project is allocated, there are procurement processes. For example, let's say we are constructing a water tank. A project, funds, etc. allocation happens, procurement, then construction happens, service delivery, operation. So this is a kind of the what service delivery chain. There is some noise coming. Probably, yeah, okay, thanks. So here you can see some of the integrity risks or corruption where it can happen. During allocation, funds allocated primarily to villages of family or friends. And we are talking on one example from a water service delivery project at a village level, let's say. Funds allocated to ghost villages and embezzled. There are no villages, but funds are allocated. Procurement, local power and community politics, tendering processes controlled by cartels, arbitrary tariff setting. Construction, substandard, cheaper materials used, build structure not according to specifications. Service delivery, bribes demanded or received for services, vulnerable communities left behind. Operation, lack of accountability and poor maintenance of facilities. No control over funds meant for operations and repairs. Money disappears. So this is just a simple example like how we can see it in an illustration where corruption can happen. And these are the integrity risks. Red flags, corruption, and poor integrity. These are some of the terms which we work with. And here, it's not always necessarily corruption, but it can make you suspicious, make you doubt, like, okay, there might be a possibility of corruption. This needs to be looked into further. Red flags of corruption are activities, circumstances, or other indicators that may indicate the presence of corrupt activities within an organization or workplace, or in projects, etc. It may be, may not be, and hence it requires what you call further investigation. At the very outset, it must be noted that the presence of red flags should not necessarily be treated as evidence that corrupt activities are taking place. Rather, red flags should be observed and treated as a potential starting point for institutional investigation into corruption, as well as compliance verification activity. Okay, here is an example from Guatemala where overpricing. Evidence that irrigation systems in country Guatemala developed without feasibility studies applied unjustified higher prices. So there was no feasibility study which probably you needed to do. This is probably not corruption, but that can be a red flag. This can be an issue of poor integrity because they decided not to have a feasibility study, which probably is required there. Poor upstream planning. We all encounter this situation. This may not be corruption. Design that did not take into account climate change impact, resulting in projects that became non-operational in Malawi. Why, we don't know. But this is kind of a issue of poor integrity because today we need to always factor in climate crisis. Because of land acquisition issues, the storage reservoir of Mabira Dam in Uganda lost almost half of its initial planned capacity. What happened around land acquisition? There was no corruption, but definitely some things which need to be probed further. Outdated sensors. Drinking water systems in El Salvador based in old sensors and failing to meet the need of the population. It's an issue of integrity somewhere. You have not updated your sensors, which you need to update, or you need to take into account the new sensors which is there before you make your planning. And this is where we need to address the issues and not necessarily directly on corruption. But here is an example of pure corruption. Fraudulent land acquisition. Wastewater plant in Bangkok was never built due to land acquisition problem. And most of the domestic and industrial wastewater, which it was intended to treat, is still discharged untreated. There has been a big scandal around this in Thailand. Compromise in design. And this is what I was from Bangladesh. It's a climate funded project. Newly constructed embankments in Bangladesh collapsed due to compromise in design height, leading to flooding of cropland. Damages estimated at a value of over $800 million in fishery and livestock. So these are some of the examples which can be red flags, can be corruption, and poor integrity. So we have to always look at it with a lens of risks first. Any example of red flag you encountered, I'll be happy to hear. If you, I mean, it's a red flag, it's not something which has been proven yet. So if you have anything, you can share on chat. Now, do you want to take a short break before we come to the next part, IWRM to WEF Nexus? Because we'll be entering now the Nexus phase.
Yes,
or is there any question? Sorry, can you please repeat?
I was saying we could take a 5 minutes break.
Okay.
Yeah, then we start on this topic.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, 5 minutes.
So we start at 10:10. That's the right time. 10:10. So let's take a break, then we come back.
Thank you so much for the insightful presentation this far, Dr. Das. We really appreciate it.
Shall we start?
Yes, we can start.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yes, I hope till now what I shared is a lot of information. I hope it has been useful. You can definitely go back to the presentation. You can look at our website, other references, and so that was broadly around water integrity, governance, corruption. And now we're going to talk more specifically around Nexus, water, energy, food Nexus. So we also know there is integrated water resource management, and then there is the water, energy, food Nexus. There is a lot of overlap, there's a lot of similarities, and there is one definition from UNESCOIHE, from the United Nations, and here it says that the key difference between the Nexus and the IWRM approach is that IWRM starts with the water resource when considering the relationships between water, food, and energy. In an idealized form, the Nexus approach seeks to look at all three elements as an interrelated system. That's one of the basic differences. However, if we go further, I want to share something else. We talk of West Nexus as in water, energy, food. However, in our current work, we have an ongoing project on West Nexus. We are talking about WEFE. We are introducing, or rather not we as we, there is a sectoral discourse about introducing WEFE, which is bringing in water, food, energy, food, and ecosystem, environment and ecosystem, which is not being considered. We're talking about nature-based solutions. This becomes important. The WEFE Nexus is a holistic and integrated approach to secure just and sustainable access to water, energy, food, and protect ecosystem now and in the future. Highlights complex interdependencies between the WEF sector. It determines trade-offs and synergies between sectors and reconciles multiple and often conflicting interests and needs. Encourages policy coherence and multi-sectoral and inclusive cooperation. Provides governance solutions to complex resource management challenges. What I'd like to mention is that when you talk of WEF Nexus, IWRM, these are concepts. These are approaches that we are all coming up with different models to address issues of management, governance, stakeholder, how to tackle stakeholder groups, the requirements of different sectors, especially when we have a crisis. But they are not always that we can say that like this is the way, this is the solution, this is the best practice. They all come with a lot of pros and cons. Hence, we always need to consider like what are the implications. It can be positive, it can be negative, and that we need to take into consideration. No solution is a perfect solution, but these are helpful. It helps us. When it comes to IWRM, for example, we're still dealing with stakeholder processes. When it comes from a technical perspective, how much of water should be allocated? If you're running it through a model, a hydrological an allocation model, that will help you more. But a lot of the decisions do not happen following science and models, which probably you are more aware of, but decisions are taken at a different level, which are influenced by politics, interest, power dynamics. And this is a bit of a disconnect between policies and decisions being made influenced by science. And that's something we should strive for more. So what is are the interlinkages of the WEF sector? why it is very crucial that we need to look at them in an integrated manner and not in silos. And when it comes for water, agriculture accounts for 70% of total global freshwater withdrawals. It's massive. The energy sector accounts for about 10 to 15% of the global freshwater withdrawal. So here goes 85%, 15% left for others. Agriculture and food chain account for 30% of global energy demand. What happens also is that there is the ecosystem which you talked about. A lot of the rivers you can see are going dry. There is drought. It can be influenced because of various factors, environmental, climate, but it also happens when resources are allocated without taking into consideration the needs of the environment. So an example of also is, let's say for agriculture production, more land use for growing food, competition over land resources, more use of fertilizers, contamination of water resources, less water security downstream. If the agriculture sector is working by themselves, they will not consider the use of the water downstream. And this is very important to look at it from a Nexus perspective. There are principles, some 10 principles which are there in terms of Nexus governance. Let's look at those which are most strongly related to the work that we are currently doing. So we have equitable and balanced weighting, equitable and balanced weighting of the water sector, water, energy, and agriculture sectors in decision-making processes. Principle 2, leaving no one behind. We talked about it quite a lot. It's a central principle of the West Nexus. Political commitment to international agendas, political will, and commitment to take action upon international agendas. For example, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. There are numerous commitments which countries have made. Strengthen cross-departmental and multi-sectoral cooperation, building an enabling environment to strengthen cross-departmental and multi-sectoral mechanisms allows to foster cooperation and communication between the sector. Enhancing mechanisms for data exchange and modeling, strengthen mechanisms and tools for exchanging and modeling relevant data, information, and statistics between governmental and non-governmental entities of the different sectors. This is also talking about what we talked before about data integrity. Principle 6, capacity development. Building Nexus capacity of people, institutions, organizations, and both the public and the private sectors through trainings and awareness raising is essential. Inclusive and participatory multi-stakeholder approach. Fostering inclusive and participatory multi-stakeholder planning and decision-making processes, including multi-stakeholder partnerships and collaborations with local, national, and regional research institutions, associations, organizations, and the private sector. Financing schemes and investments. Financing schemes and investments shall support West Nexus implementation objectives to facilitate innovative and future-oriented methods. Sustainable and efficient resource use, promotion of sustainable efficient resource use and consumption patterns, furthering peace and preventing conflict, improve peace, stability, and security in a fragile contract to the West Nexus in areas where resource conflicts are exacerbated by climate change. Here, if you look at these 10 principles of Nexus, and if you look back at the OECD water governance principles, which I had shared before, the 12 principles, you'll see a significant overlap. So at the end, we are talking two different approaches. How do we address similar problems? Now, what is integrity within the West Nexus? This is an ongoing work of WIN, and soon we'll be developing guidelines, integrity guidelines for West Nexus. Within the West Nexus, integrity as a crucial component of good governance is about achieving equity and sustainability in the water, energy, food, and environment sectors. The adoption of the West Nexus involves multi-stakeholders and requires coordination and integration across levels of government as well as across sectors. This involves assessing common risks, what we mentioned, integrity risks, a balanced decision-making process, joint funding mobilization, as well as joint action towards common objectives. Addressing integrity concerns can support these processes and help achieve common objectives in an efficient manner. We need to identify common objectives. Integrity framework for WEF Nexus. Framework outlines the main areas within the establishment and operationalization of the WEF Nexus. There are overarching risks which we have identified and overarching tools that can help in mitigate those risks. And these integrity elements are incorporated within the WEF Nexus. And we're focusing on 4 areas in the Nexus, what we call the 4I: institutional integrity, integrity in information, data, what we mentioned before, integrity in investments, integrity in implementation. In institutional, balanced decision-making, multi-sectoral cooperation. These are some of the principles we looked at in the past slide. Data and information sharing, WEF Nexus capacity. Financial control procedures, establishment of financing schemes, alignment to policies and framework. Mechanisms for control, monitoring, and reporting, sustainable, efficient resource use, participatory planning and decision-making process. So in institutional, ensuring equitable and balanced weighing of welfare sectors and decision-making processes, strengthen cross-departmental and multi-sectoral cooperation. In information, strengthen mechanisms and tools for exchanging and modeling relevant data, information, and statistics. Build welfare nexus capacity of people, institutions, and organizations. Investments. Align welfare nexus policies and projects with SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and other regional and international frameworks. Develop financing schemes and investments to support welfare nexus implementation. Establish clear procedures to control the allocation and usage of financial resources. Implementation. Establish clear and robust mechanisms for control, monitoring, and reporting through the project cycle. Foster inclusive and participatory multi-stakeholder planning and decision-making processes. Promote sustainable and efficient resource use. Some of these you'll see are already reflected back in the principles, but we want to emphasize and strengthen on those. How do you actually operationalize them? Now we have talked about integrity risks before, and now we're also talking about something called integrity tools. Integrity risks are conditions that will negatively affect the capacity of organizations to fulfill their mandates with integrity, and that compromises sustainable water and sanitation service provision. Integrity risks have a known probability of occurrence. Integrity risks are possible at different levels, from individual actions such as accepting bribes for service delivery to collusion in big infrastructure projects involving powerful groups. Red flags. We mentioned before red flags. So there is a similarity here. When we are talking about integrity risk, some of the red flags are very useful here and helps in identifying the risk and taking measures that can avoid future corruption, hopefully. Tools. Integrity tools, something which WIN works with quite a lot, are measures and actions that an organization can take to prevent, reduce, or mitigate integrity risk. Now, in relation to Nexus and in the 4 I's, we have identified some of the overarching risks. So some of the risks which we have observed in welfare processes are unbalanced weighing of welfare sectors in decision-making processes. So it's power dynamics plays in here. Maybe energy sector is influencing most of the decisions here because they have more clout. And how do you actually balance that out? Lack of mechanisms to communicate, coordinate, and cooperate across levels and sectors. There is not enough communication, deliberation among the different sectors, among the multi-stakeholders. Lack of accurate and reliable data to ensure informed decision-making process. Insufficient knowledge, expertise, and capacity across levels and sectors. This is coming across often. Misalignment of WEF Nexus investment projects with regional and international frameworks. Sometimes, for example, there are climate projects which actually are not climate projects, but they are being submitted as climate projects because it's for another project, another purpose, but trying to access climate funding, this is happening quite a lot. Mismanagement of funds destined to finance weapon access investment projects, lack of mechanisms to monitor and control project implementation, lack of mechanisms to ensure multi-stakeholder participation throughout the project cycle, unsustainable and insufficient resource use. We have identified these risks in consultation with various weapon access stakeholders. And in collaboration with GIZ, we are having an ongoing project where they have what they call Nexus dialogues in different regions of the world, and they're being consulted to identify what are the challenges they encounter. This consultation also includes the Green Climate Fund, and this consultation also includes the European Union, who actually have invested into many WEF Nexus projects with the GIZ. And we are also talking to different experts to identify what are the challenges. So these are some of the overarching risks which we have identified and what it can lead to. So unbalanced weighing of welfare sectors in decision-making processes can lead to regulatory capture by powerful actors from different sectors, undue political influence, private sector seeking opposing outcomes to those of weapon actors, lack of mechanisms to communicate, coordinate, and cooperate can lead to unclear institutional roles and responsibilities, no mechanisms to resolve institutional disputes, collusion of public officials. Now, this is something which is an ongoing war, and in a couple of months, we will be able to share with you the guidelines. So the approach is when you know that these are the risks, and this can lead to this kind of impact, how to ensure, how to mitigate it, try to work with a set of tools. And here, for example, we are providing some kind of guidelines because the work, mapping the tools is an ongoing work. So the guidelines, what we are talking about are like, again, ensuring equitable and balancing weighing of welfare sectors in decision making. We are coming up with certain tools which will be useful in the process, strengthen cross-departmental cooperation, strengthen mechanisms and tools, build weapon access capacity of people, institutions, and organizations, align weapon access policies and projects, develop financial schemes and investments to support weapon access, establish clear procedures to control the allocation and usage of financial resources, establish clear and robust mechanisms for control, monitoring, and reporting, foster inclusive and participatory multi-stakeholder planning and decision-making, promote sustainable and water resource use. So if you follow these guidelines and apply the tools, the Water Integrity Network has a set of 60 tools. Because of the current focus of the seminar and the time, we will not be able to go into the details of that. However, we'll be happy to share that with you. But what can this lead to in a positive sense? It may lead to an indicative tools which we are coming up with. Develop national and regional governance frameworks. For example, that's the kind of tool recommendation we are making. Develop guiding documents to facilitate and standardize coordination processes of the weapon access. Regulate lobby and conflict of interest on welfare sectors. Set cooling off periods. Design and implement intersectoral and interministerial frameworks for engagement and coordination of the weapon access. Develop and implement mechanisms to resolve weapon access institutional disputes. Set dedicated weapon access units or focal points in already existing institutional structures. At the end, what we are talking about is building integrity readiness. Integrity readiness within weapon access processes and projects. And not necessarily weapon access, it's in IWRM, in other areas of water management, where do you need to focus on strengthening integrity? It's not, let's say, all, but comprehensive enough to look at. In policy making, need to get integrity readiness You need to integrate integrity, embed integrity in the policy process, in regulation, within multi-stakeholder processes, finances and investments, planning and designing, in allocation of resources and trade-offs. And finally, what we mentioned about gender and inclusion, which is also something important from an integrity perspective. You need to undertake assessments, integrity assessments, before the initiation of a project, apply integrity assessment tools, risk assessment tools, then the management of the integrity processes, and finally, you need to monitor the processes which are put in place. If you want to strengthen integrity, some steps you have taken, some tools which are applied, are you monitoring them to see what it is leading to? What is there need for course correction? What are the impacts? So very briefly, there are integrity tools which are available from WIN and from other organizations. They're practical, they're participatory, they're data-driven, they're adaptable. Most importantly, tools should be adaptable at the context level. It can be a tool that can be adapted for urban water management. It can be a tool that can be adapted for water allocation or irrigation management. So this is important that we try to work with. Water integrity tools portfolio. I am just providing a snapshot of the different tools which are there, which we are using also in our Nexus work. Assessment tools. So you need to understand what are the different kinds of risks that exist in relationship to integrity. One of the tools is the annotated water integrity scan, which is a quick participatory assessment tool which assesses the integrity situation at a national or local level for stakeholders to establish a baseline and prioritize where to focus for programs and reforms. This is a good tool when you want to start talking about the sensitive topic of corruption. Here, you can get different stakeholders together and start a discussion without pointing fingers or without being accusatory. Water Integrity Risk Index. It's a data-driven tool, a composite big data index to measure and benchmark levels of integrity risk in a city over time using open procurement data. There is data available openly in relation to water projects, infrastructure projects. We have been using that tool in different countries and trying to find out what are the risks that exist, looking at the pattern of data. Sometimes data is not available, and this is also a challenge. Utility integrity assessment, an action-oriented assessment data for decision-making on integrity risks at utility level. Management tools. When you have identified risks through assessment, you would like to take some measures. You would like to apply some tools to manage that situation. And here we have a few other tools, and here we are highlighting two. The integrity management toolbox for organizations. These tools help organizations and institutions map and prioritize corruption risks in corporate governance, operations, and service delivery to develop relevant, targeted, practical, preventive, and corrective action. Integrity management toolbox for organizations is an adaptable resources and structured process for systematic integrity risk management at organizational level in utilities, regulators, water boards, river basin organizations, and similar sector institutions. Integrity management toolbox for communities, structured processes to improve performance and compliance of small water systems, small farmer groups, and community managed systems. What is important is that when you talk of small rural systems, farming communities, they're often left out in processes. They do not always grasp the different laws, the different policies, the different compliance mechanisms that are put in place by the government, by the state. This tool helps in aligning with those policies for the communities to have their own capacities, have their own tools. They're empowered to be part of those processes. And integrity management toolbox for organization helps organizations to look at their processes within, for example, within management and leadership, governance structure, financial management, operations, human resource management, relationships with other stakeholders, your customers, policies. So these are the things which are addressed through the toolbox. We also have developed integrity-related risks and tools relevant for fragile contexts, political instability, withdrawal of funding, what can happen, and how to address those kind of risks. So I think we'd like to leave some time for questions, and if we any feedback, anything more, anyone else wants to share around this, that would be great. And so moving forward to integrity, I'd just like to mention, like, we need to get started, start the conversation about corruption and connect with integrity champions. There are a lot of integrity champions. There are a lot of people who are doing good work within government organizations, within non-governmental organizations, internationally. We need to all connect together. Announce the commitment, make a commitment, announce the commitment publicly, and commit resources for integrity risk assessment and management. Assess the context and risk, build a joint understanding of the risk, priorities, and context with data from the most marginalized context. It is important to understand a joint understanding of the risk because different people have different perceptions. Be inclusive. Ensure explicit focus, gender and inclusion, and set specific target for informal settlements, for example, because they are mostly left out. Think through the transparency, accountability, participation, and anti-corruption framework. So here I'm just sharing 3 publications, recent publications from WIN. One is an enhancing integrity to avoid maladaptation, a thematic brief, and water integrity as an opportunity, the relationship between climate change, finance, and the water sector. This is very relevant for IWRM and West Nexus work. And water integrity global outlook, which looks at issues of integrity in urban water and sanitation. I would like to stop here. Thank you. And please, if there are questions or other comments.
Thank you so much. The floor is open for questions, guys, comments, or to share experience. Let's have a discussion. Anyone online? Anyone here? Okay, if there's no one, I just want to share an experience and maybe ask if we call this bribe, because I know our student will soon be going in the field to collect data, which they may experience what I experienced. So when I was doing my data collection in one of the countries in West Africa, we're looking at the sanitation situation in some of the areas. So one of the methodologies we're using is the key informats. So we needed to do some interview with some ministries, those who are responsible for the area. So my experience there is that if you don't give money, to the person who is organizing, the whole interview, then you won't have a meeting. So at the end of the day, we had to pay something for us to have an audience. We then call that as maybe bribe. Is it integrity, or how do you call it? Because I'm sure our students are going in the field, and some people want money from them. And on our side, as managers, for example, if one of the students puts it as on a budget, do we approve such or not? Because this is happening on the ground. So probably we could discuss that. What is the way forward? How do we handle the situation as such?
I could hear parts of it, I will say, because there's some background noise, but I think I understood for undertaking, let's say, data collection activities, you need to pay.
Yes.
You need to pay to get the data.
Yes.
I mean, from a pure perspective of water governance or governance, this definitely is can be called corruption. Probably you are paying a bribe, because if it is public information, if it is supposed to be public information, then it should be transparently available. That's one. And if it is not publicly available but confidential for certain reasons, but should be made available for the purpose of education for students, that consideration, that factor should be there. Many times, in the private sector, you have to pay for data to get the data. So there probably they have their what you call processes in place, and then they're making some money out of data. Now, it can also be something which has been part of the process for a long time, and then it's like, will you consider it purely corruption, or will you consider it, okay, this is an issue, this is probably an issue of integrity? Or if someone is willing to share the data without taking the money, then it's a way to break that cycle. I think that probably is important to identify who are probably more open to share the data without taking the money. Obviously, what can be done around it, it depends on the local context, the situation which I'm not aware of. If you find it a very major integrity issue, or it is actually affecting you, obviously financially, ethically, it's probably a process to start talking about it more, maybe through the media. If you are not willing to be talking about it openly, then probably anonymously it can be talked about in the media with the relevant officials who are there. Maybe that's a way to start the discussion and see if it helps. I mean, that's what I can say. Probably you have also other ideas.
Yeah, I think in most cases, like from my personal experience, it's more like something that is embedded. It's now a culture where no one feels that it's a bribe anymore. It's like everywhere you go, you just have to pay. If you don't pay, no one opens their mouth. And it has been going on, And deep down, this is an integrity, kind of, because it's open data, it's a public data. Yeah.
Yes, if it is public data, then obviously it's an issue. But I think when you mention it going on for long, I mean, it's culture also, how we are, how we look at it. When you look at corruption from, let's say, the perspective of northern discourse from Transparency International, it's not always the same. Sometimes when you are, for example, if you have someone from the water utility coming to your place to solve one of your problems, maybe leaked pipe, it's a tradition to give probably some money after the person has done the work. Will you consider that corruption? This is also a question which comes up. Maybe that's not corruption. That's more like also helping someone else, because they also don't have enough financial resources probably.
I see there's a hand online. Tekla. Tekla, then Rennie. Tekla, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Just hold on. Let me try and fix my. Can you hear me now?
Yes, okay.
Okay, so my name is Tekla. I'm a PhD student, and my focus area is on water provision. I just wanted to add that one of the issues that I've noticed while doing my research, and I've also collected data already, the most pressing issue that came out was a lot of our politicians or like positions in municipalities when it comes to water provision. A lot of them came or did mention that the issue is that in Namibia, people are given positions, key positions in water sectors, while they don't deserve these positions, or they are not having qualifications in this position. So they are frustrating the subordinates under them, because now they are making decisions, but they don't know what they're doing. They are not well informed. And if your boss gives you or gives you instructions, or they're making decisions, you're likely to just take what they're saying, because you report to this person. It's very difficult for you to stand up and maybe complain, because the whole system is just corrupt in a sense that there's favoritism and nepotism. Some of these people in these offices are very powerful. So subordinates or employees are complaining that they are scared to be intimidated, or they are being intimidated at work once they speak out. Looking at the fact that my study is also on municipalities, then you look at councillors of municipalities that are the highest body, or they're like the at the top of making decisions. Most of them don't even have qualifications. I was speaking to a lot of them. They don't understand the water situation, and they're the ones who are making decisions in the municipalities. So this is one problem that has came out, especially when I was collecting data. And also the second thing is just to say that policies are also outdated, especially in Namibia. Policies have been there since colonialism, or the time of before independence. And then you ask the council members, some of them will even tell you that no, unfortunately, we don't have time to review these policies or these regulations when it comes to water. So yeah, it's a huge issue when it comes to, I think, mostly the politicians and the councillors, because they are voted into power. It's not like they are appointed based on qualifications. They are voted into power, and most of them, it's just because of the politics, but they don't really have the knowledge. Another thing is just I wanted to ask, will you be able to share your slides with us after the webinar? Thank you very much.
Yes, I shared a PDF, but I will share the slides also. I will share it. Yes, I mean, this is definitely a very difficult challenge. We have come across this in our work too, when we go to work, for example, with water utilities or municipalities. When we talk of integrity management, let's say the managing director or the management is interested, but the board might not be interested, the governing board, which is always dominated by politicians. So this is a challenge. What we feel is that it's very important to get the investor on board, because the investor might have some influence, the donor and the investor. And it's important to work with them, because they might be able to put in some criteria. We have tools, as I mentioned, which can help in avoiding this kind of recruitment, which happens all across. Qualified people are not recruited, rather it's a position because of favoritism, nepotism, and obviously it affects the services. So we try to work with investors and see if this is something doable, but very difficult. And second, strengthening regulatory systems is another way to see if this can be mitigated. Otherwise, yeah, a lot depends on the context of if you get integrity champions up there, who is probably a city mayor or the managing director or a government minister, they can definitely influence this quite a lot. And it has happened, for example, in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh. There was the managing director who was very much what you call a person with a strong integrity, and he had the backing of the prime minister, and he could make a lot of change in the water utility in Phnom Penh. So these are very important to have the right people to back such reform processes.
Ready? Your hand was up earlier.
Thank you, Dr. Mabuku. No, I was going to respond to your earlier question to say, is it corruption or not? I think it is corruption. The fact that it's ongoing and we've embedded it and almost accepted it doesn't change what it is. It still remains corruption. And I think the strength of promoting integrity and accountability is to bring to light some of those practices that over time seem to be acceptable when they're actually coming at a cost. They're at a cost in terms of the quality of research being done. They're at a cost in terms of inflating the research associated costs for our projects and even compromising the quality of our research when students, probably even researchers, do not have access to data that is ideally supposed to be in the public domain. And if there's a cost associated to it, it should be made known. And I think the more we have transparent processes, the more such practices can be questioned. And the more we have got systems that ensure accountability, the more such practices can be deterred. So that I was just trying to respond to your earlier question, say it is true. And I think that is part of the reason why this needs to be flagged out, to say we need to start questioning, but instead of going for a witch hunt, why not raise awareness, promote accountability, especially when it is public office holders, public office bearers. They can be brought to task if platforms to query such issues are there. But at times, if the platform is not there, then it continues happening because stakeholders don't have an opportunity to voice without being victimized. There are platforms that can actually protect the identity of those that are being that have witnessed or that would want to be whistleblowers, so to say, without necessarily making them vulnerable to victimization afterwards. So that's why this topic is very exciting for me, because I think increasingly the more transparent our processes are, the less the opportunities for unethical conduct to happen within public offices.
Thank you, Rainy, for that. Anyone in the room? Faith?
Thank you, Dr. Mabuku. Mine is, I think it's a mix of both the comment, observation, and the question as well. I think one of the challenges that researchers especially face is like we in our echo chambers, we're talking to the converted and sometimes don't necessarily have the tools to communicate with the lay people. Issues, for example, of water, energy, and food, they actually manifest at a local level. But however, what is the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is happening at a global level and translated mainly to the national level into policies. And these issues don't really cascade down to the local level so that they know what they are really entitled to and who to actually be asking for accountability. But I think this also brings in there the role of civil society as watchdogs. And to this end, I would like to find out what is the footprint of the Water Integrity Network in engaging civil society organizations, at least within the Southern Africa region or Sub-Saharan Africa region, and what sort of capacity building or tools are available for them, and are they freely available as well? That's my contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope I got what you are saying. So yes, I completely agree that these global goals are agreed at a very high level and funds are allocated for that purpose, but there is a major disconnect between the global and the local level. There is what you call there are decisions which are made there and it affects locally. Civil society organizations are not always part of the decision-making process. Last week, we organized a workshop with Sanitation and Water for All, focused on civil society organizations and climate funding. And what is interesting is that there are examples which are shared by CSOs that they are not even aware of climate funds that a country received from, let's say, the Green Climate Fund. And it was only when probably something, the project was over and something was inaugurated, then only CSOs came to know, and then there are other issues which are coming around these projects. What we had under the welfare Nexus, what we are trying to do is we had a workshop 2 weeks back where government organizations who are involved in developing project proposals for, let's say, the Green Climate Fund, we tried to organize a workshop to let the Green Climate Fund talk to the government agencies who are the implementing agencies in the ground, because there is no direct connection between them. Everything is coming in to countries through accredited entities. And so there are some processes which are being put in place where you can probably report wrongdoing, whistleblowing mechanisms. They are being put in place, but their applicability is still limited. What we are discussing is like, how can we work more with CSOs to work as watchdogs, to look at, let's say, climate funded projects, like the finances which are coming in. How can CSOs play a more active role? And hopefully we'll be taking this kind of a work soon in the future. We do have tools, as I mentioned, like Integrity Management Toolbox, which empowers communities and CSOs, which they can apply, because it's a space where it's not easy to understand. It's a bit somewhat abstract when you talk about what is integrity, what is accountability, what is transparency. And so these tools can help in this process a bit.
Any other? Anyone wants to say anything? Okay. Anyone online? Okay. It looks like there are no questions, there are no comments, and I see it's 10:56. It's supposed to end at 11 o'clock exactly. You have used all your time. And I think I would just like to thank you for coming up. I think this is one of those seminars that we all needed. Normally, I don't attend some of the seminars. I'll be doing some other things, but I felt it was necessary to actually attend this. And we are looking forward to engaging you more in this kind of seminars. So thank you so much. Rennie, I think Rennie is in another meeting. I will not call her here. Yeah, so.
No, I'm here, yeah. Doctor.
You are there?
I'm still here.
Okay, I'm closing the seminar, so I just wanted to.
Please go ahead. On my part, is just to appreciate the participants as well as Dr. Binayak does. These are exciting discussions, and just to request that you continue to keep us in the loop as the regional processes within the SADC region continue to unfold. We would really want to continue understanding how the dialogue is unfolding and how we can continue learning from ongoing regional processes. Over to you, Dr. Monde.
Okay.
Thanks. I would also like to thank everyone for this opportunity, for this invitation. I really enjoyed sharing and also hearing from you. I mean, that's also very important to know about some of the examples that you shared today. We continue our work, very difficult work, but we'll keep you updated. I'll share the presentation. You can come back, and if you need more resources, please let me know. And if you are interested to, in future, organize a workshop or training around the tool or any particular tool, we'll be very happy to do that. In this challenging times of online workshop, we are still trying to resolve it, but I think we will be able to provide some kind of training around tools if you are interested in the future. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. We hope to see you soon. Bye. Those online.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
This call